I was one who went to Saudi Arabia before, and to go to Saudi Arabia today and compare it to what I used to see when I would go in the 80s and 90s, it's simply a different world. I mean, literally, it is a different world.
Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, widely known as MBS, has been in Washington this week, meeting with President Trump, his first visit to Washington in 7 years. Since the last time that Trump invited him, welcomed him, that was before the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, before the firestorm, the global firestorm that erupted over it, and before the Biden administration came in and, at least for the first few years, decided to treat Mohammed bin Salman as the murderer, even though that has not yet ever been proven, at least with public proof. So what happened with this trip? President Trump really rolled out the red carpet, literally and figuratively, for MBS and his team, and a lot has gotten done. Will this lead to a stronger U.S.-Saudi relationship, an alliance that's about 8 decades old now? Will it lead to an actual peace and normalization deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia? Hi, this is Joel Rosenberg. Welcome to the Inside the Epicenter podcast, the educational flagship project of the Joshua Fund, a ministry to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus, according to the Abrahamic covenant. And this Inside the Epicenter podcast, during this last 2 years of war, has shot up to be in the top 1% of all podcasts in the world. I think it's just just further proof that you guys are all looking for a long-form, in-depth conversation about what's really happening in Israel and the broader Muslim and Arab world that you can trust. And we're glad to be part of this. So I want to welcome today my guest, former U.S. Ambassador Dennis Ross. Dennis has been a senior advisor to multiple American presidents, both Republicans and Democrats. President George H.W. Bush, President George W. Bush, and served as the Iran point man under Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, as well as being an informal advisor to about five, I believe it's five U.S. presidents, both Republican and Democrat, over the year. Dennis is a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Dennis joins me from Washington. Dennis, great to have you here. Thanks for spending some time here on Inside the Epicenter.
Joel, it's always good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's an honor. You have great insights into what's happening. So let's just start with, what are some of your takeaways? We can drill into some of the specifics in a moment, but what are some of your takeaways from MBS's visit to Washington? He not only was at the White House, but up on Capitol Hill as well. Where would you begin? What are some of the highlights for you?
Well, I think where I would begin would be on the essence of what looks to be truly a strategic relationship with the United States, a set of choices that Mohammed bin Salman is making in terms of tying Saudi Arabia to the United States, especially not just in the security area, but also in the AI area, in what I call the nexus of finance, energy, and artificial intelligence. He wants that tie because he sees this putting Saudi Arabia on a path that he wants to achieve. He wants to transform Saudi Arabia to the point where its economy is not only not dependent on oil, but that he has generated a reality in Saudi Arabia where the younger population there changes the nature of its overall culture, in the sense that it has preoccupation with development, modernization, an economy that is digitally based and that is generating jobs for a younger population that is sort of digitally astute. And he sees that future being bound to the United States. A lot of what was discussed and what was
better than the alternative, right? Russia, China.
Well, absolutely. And it's not that he won't have a relationship with others, but it's in the high tech areas he wants to be bound to the United States. And then for me, that's what this trip was about. And I think it was highly successful from that standpoint.
I agree with you, and I'm encouraged. Look, you and I have both separately, but individually, have had multiple opportunities to sit down with MBS in Saudi Arabia over the years. I have not seen him since the October 7th war erupted. And when I met with him twice for multiple hours with our evangelical delegation, it was even before the Abraham Accords had kicked in. But everything you just described is exactly what he told me that he wanted. And he wants a strong relationship with the United States. He was concerned that 9/11 was a very severe risk of blowing up the U.S.-Saudi alliance that started back in 1945 with, I think it was his grandfather or great-grandfather?
His great-grandfather.
Great-grandfather, and President Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Actually, no, I was wrong. It was his grandfather.
Okay,
because his father is part of that first generation of successors.
Well, because he's so young and his father's so old, I kind of lost track if there was another generation in between there. But
no, so that's right.
I think he has what his father and grandfather wanted, and he's in a much better position, right, to strengthen this relationship. But so much has happened over the last few years. First, a lot of twists and turns because of that murder of Khashoggi, which I want to get to in a moment. He addressed it in the Oval Office, and I think that's important. But for the moment, Trump is giving him a bear hug, right? Trip in the first term, Trump went to Saudi first. And then in the first trip on the second term, he went to Saudi first. What does Trump want out of the relationship? You describe what MBS wants. Does Trump want the same thing?
I think the answer is probably yes, in the sense that if you look at this president's approach to foreign policy, it's based on transactions. It's based on doing business. President Trump is not someone who emphasizes values, but he emphasizes deals. And he looks at it in terms of investments around the world, but also having Saudi investments here. Even under Biden, there was a commitment to do about $600 billion worth of investments in this country, and that was picked up by President Trump's first visit. What you hear the Crown Prince saying now is that he expects that to rise to about $1 trillion. We're not talking about in a year. We're talking about over the next decade or so. So what President Trump wants, obviously, are these deals on the one hand that bind us together in the high-tech area, because after all, when you're talking about Saudi Arabia and you're in a competition with China, you want Saudi Arabia in the next generation of technologies to be looking to us, not to be looking to China. Right. If they look to China, then it means that the character of our competition is fundamentally changed. And there's even another factor here that needs to be considered. One of the elements of AI, and the reason Saudi Arabia is such a natural partner for this, you need to generate enormous amounts of energy for these data centers, which consume so much data. The more you are generating data, the more power you have to be able to provide these data centers. The data centers themselves require huge amounts of space. So you need space, you need lots of energy, and you need the financing ability to pay for all this. Well, Saudi Arabia is kind of this perfect nexus of energy vastly available, financing clearly available, and the space to be able to go ahead and build these large data centers. So having the two of us work in this area allows us to stay ahead of everyone, which is where we need to be when it comes to AI. So there's a natural partnership here. The fact that there is also a very big defense buy, F-35s, 300 tanks, that also tends to bind us, because you need a logistic train, a support maintenance trade. Once you buy onto this, your whole security structure is based on the United States. This began obviously a long time ago. This wasn't created by President Trump. This literally goes back to really the F-15 sales in Jimmy Carter's time, and then AWACS under President Reagan. These created a kind of built-in structural orientation. But what you have now with the Crown Prince is he wants to cement this, and clearly that's what President Trump wants to do as well.
Yeah, so we're talking about three different areas for the moment. I mean, there are other shades of it, but so President Trump wants a very strong economic tie to Saudi Arabia. He loves the $1 trillion worth of investment. He, yes, it's probably over a decade, but he needs it quickly, some of it, right? Because he wants to create jobs.
Yeah.
He wants to show economic
Yeah.
growth, and he
Yes.
wants it by the midterm elections. He's got some all politics or local engines driving what Trump wants. But he also wants, as you say, this very robust security architecture where the Saudis are not being drawn into the Russian and Chinese camp, which they were sort of playing footsie, I would say, with the Chinese and the Russians to diversify when they felt like they, were losing the Democrats on the Hill and losing President Biden for the first couple of years. Now, to Biden's credit, I've criticized him a lot for how he handled the Khashoggi murder because I don't think there was proof, but he did pivot back and realize for oil prices, for security, for the Iran relationship, everything else, that the United States needed the Saudis, even though it's a complicated relationship, human rights and other issues. So the economy, security, Trump, certainly his foreign policy is, I want to do less of sending U.S. boots on the ground or even forces generally to other parts of the world, particularly the Middle East. Couldn't you, Israel and the UAE and Saudi and Bahrain and the others, couldn't you guys pretty much work with us, but you guys be the point men to deal with your own problems over there, and I'll back you up. And finally, the technology AI side. So that brings us to, and there's so much more to get into that, but for the moment, let's front load. Is Trump transactional enough that he wants to condition F-35 sales and maybe some of the other issues, the civilian nuclear power? He said yes to these things, but they didn't sign, seal, and deliver on them as far as I understand it. So he did upgrade the Saudi-U.S. relationship to major non-NATO status. So that's good. That's what Israel has. It's what Qatar just got. But I want to ask you about the Abraham Accords. What Trump really wants, I don't know if he needs, but he really wants to see the Saudis take the plunge and join the team. And I think that would be a game changer for the entire region. How do you read what was said in the Oval Office and kind of where the Saudis are on this, where Trump is on using the U.S.-Saudi relationship to strengthen Israel and the Saudis together?
I would say, to some extent, it does appear as if there's been some decoupling. In the Biden administration, the idea there was going to be a defense treaty, and he could have delivered a defense treaty because he could deliver 15 to 20 Democrats, and the Republicans were all going to vote for it, meaning a bilateral defense treaty. That's not possible given the Democratic opposition, because you need 2/3, you need 67. So that's not possible under Trump. So he's talked about an executive agreement, much like he's given Qatar. He is not conditioning the F-35 on normalization with Israel. There was, under Biden, there was a package. It was the idea of defense treaty and the civil nuclear agreement, and there had to be normalization in return. They were very close to that before October 7th. In fact, one of the reasons Hamas did what it did was to prevent normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel for the reasons you were getting at, because it is a game changer for all sorts of reasons, not the least of which is this is a leading Sunni Muslim state. This is the king of Saudi Arabia, is the custodian of the two holy mosques. In terms of the Sunni Muslim world, which is 85% of the Muslims worldwide, this is probably the single most important state. So you're not just affecting the Middle East per se, you're affecting what could be a much broader reconciliation. Now, is that important to President Trump? The answer is yes. But he's not conditioning the F-35s on that. He's not conditioning the civil nuclear agreement on that. He clearly is raising it, but I think we're also in a somewhat different place than we were, because from the Saudi standpoint, we're dealing with what I call the two realities in the Middle East post-October 7th. In Israel, the Israeli public saw only the hostages and the trauma from October 7th. In the Arab world, and I was there multiple times, specifically in Saudi Arabia since October 7th, all you saw on the television, and I'm not talking Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is basically an incitement disinformation channel. It's basically a Muslim Brotherhood platform.
Based in Doha, Qatar.
Yes. But you look at all the other stations, satellite stations, including those that aren't like that, including like Al Arabiya, for example.
Right.
And what you saw was the death and destruction in Gaza.
Yeah.
That profoundly affected the public opinion in Saudi Arabia and much of the Arab world.
Sure.
It's interesting that prior to October 7th, the backbone of support for the Crown Prince and what he's done in Saudi Arabia, we should be very clear, Joel, he's carried out a social revolution in Saudi Arabia. It's the only way to describe it.
And an economic revolution at the same time, but it's definitely tied together. Women drive, and they didn't before. They can serve in the military, they can serve in the police, they can serve in the workforce, and they couldn't before. They can get a passport and take their daughters overseas if they want, if they're divorced or if they're separated or if their husband simply doesn't want them to go. Just those alone, and there are many others, it really is pretty extraordinary. I think most of it has gotten missed entirely by either a media that doesn't care or, admittedly, the firestorm over Khashoggi, which has colored everything, and not entirely unreasonably.
Right. No, I agree with you. But the transformation is extraordinary. It's the only way to describe it. I was one who went to Saudi Arabia before, and to go to Saudi Arabia today and compare it to what I used to see when I would go in the 80s and 90s, it's simply a different world. I mean, literally, it is a different world. I want to highlight this with an interesting example, and it's not just the things I've seen. One of the people who in the royal court who has managed my trips when I've gone there is a young woman in her early 30s. She was trained as a pharmacist. She went into the royal court. I asked her at one point, how has life changed for you? And she said, well, before I couldn't have dreams, and now I have dreams. And she's about to finish up her tenure in the royal court. She's going to be coming to Johns Hopkins to get a PhD in biotech.
Wow.
That would have been literally unthinkable before.
Wow.
So it's
and also, Dennis, for you, I mean, you're a lifelong diplomat and a Middle East as well as international affairs scholar and expert. So it's not surprising that you went in and out of Saudi Arabia over the years, right? And you worked for President and Secretary of State. For me, as a mere civilian with no political power and as a Jew, sons in the Israeli army, as an evangelical even, not only to go, but to be invited twice into the palace, carrying my Bible. I mean, I don't want to overstate my experience, but I think it is one of those little tiny pieces of the pointillism that says Jews, Christians, non-powerful, non-oil, non-government people non-military people didn't come to the forbidden kingdom. He now is throwing the doors open, and he's trying to use examples of inviting me and the evangelicals just as one of many Jewish delegations and others to show we're not forbidden anymore. We're not dark and mysterious. We want the light of the world to come in, and we want you to come and invest and visit and tour. That's huge.
It is huge. That's why I say it is an economic revolution, but the reality is there has been a social revolution, and it's one of the huge changes that's happened in the region, and it offers an interesting reality. There's never been a successful model of development in the Arab world. You've had the competitions, you had the Nasserists, and then you had the Islamists. There were the Arab nationalists, and then there were the Islamists, whether they were Sunni or Shia, meaning like in Iran. And their model was, look, the answer is our approach. And their answer was using religion for political purposes, for purposes of justifying their power. So here is an approach that says, no, there's a different way. And what he has done is make development and modernization the source of legitimacy. It's not Wahhabism anymore. It's modernization that's the source of legitimacy. That's why what he wants to do in AI is so important. One of the things I left out, there were agreements that were worked out as part of this trip that also relate to rare earth minerals and also magnets. And there is a partnership between a company here with the Defense Department and a state-owned mining company in Saudi Arabia. That there's an agreement that has emerged from this trip. And we know the issue of rare earth minerals is something that China dominates, not only the mining of it, but the processing of it.
Right.
They control about 93% of it. And it's, these rare earth minerals, what they're used for everything from your flat screen TV to the displays and avionics on the F-35. So they shape every part of life these days, and unless you diversify the supply chain, you put yourself in a position where China has just enormous leverage over us. So,
right. And look how easy it was to negotiate that deal with the Saudis, as opposed to the high friction when Trump tried to negotiate a deal with Volodymyr Zelensky. Now that was over some other right. additionally complicated issues, and it got resolved. But I'm just saying that was what triggered, in part, the firestorm in the Oval Office between Zelensky and Trump. I'm very grateful that relationship has improved somewhat. And I was invited to go meet with Zelensky and interview him about a month and a half ago. But my point is how relatively simple a relationship with the Saudis is. I don't mean in Congress, certainly on the Democratic side in Congress,
right.
in which all of this is very complicated. But Trump has a 3.5-year window ahead or so, a little bit less than that now, in which he's trying to make some movement with a country he thinks is a great benefit to the United States. And I agree with him on this, though I'm cognizant of and sensitive to the challenges.
Yeah, look, we're going through a period of transformation internationally. I have a new book out called Statecraft 2.0, What America Needs to Lead in a Multipolar World. And one of the points I make is that timing is to statecraft what location is to real estate. We have a moment right now. You need to capitalize on the moment. MBS realizes there's a moment. Now, the moment in the Middle East was created by what Israel did in terms of fundamentally transforming the military balance of power. The Iran has been dramatically set back. Hezbollah has been dramatically set back. The regional proxy network is not what it was. It can't apply the coercion that it did before because it's been dramatically weakened. They haven't disappeared. And we're watching the Lebanese army is not doing as much as it should be doing to disarm Hezbollah. But Hezbollah, even though it's still there, it isn't anything like what it was as a threat. One of the reasons you have Ahmed al-Shara in Syria was because the weakness of Hezbollah ended up producing the collapse of Assad. The Russians weren't able to come in and save him. The Iranians weren't able to come in and save him. The combination of Hezbollah being the crown jewel of the regional proxy network and Syria being the pivotal geopolitical, geostrategic linkage between Iran and Lebanon, that's now gone. So the region is in a fundamentally different place. It is safer for countries that want to do peace with Israel to be able to think about doing it. Now, this brings me back to what I was saying before about the impact on public opinion of the images that have come out of Gaza. Right. They will not soon go away. The issue of normalization right now for Saudi Arabia is not a question of if, but it is a question of when. And I don't mean, when I use that distinction, MBS clearly understands that Israel wants in the region what he wants, that Israel in so many ways is a natural partner. Right. But today, from his standpoint, the political context in which he operates is much more complex than it was on October 6th, 2023, when we were very close to an agreement on normalization. I don't believe we will...
Just to be clear about that, 2 points on that. One, I just want to make sure I'm hearing you. Yeah. Often, I think what you mean is that often when somebody says it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, that's usually being bullish that it's going to happen sooner rather than later. Right. We don't know exactly when. What you're saying is this thing has been pushed back somewhat. We don't know how long. And related to that, so did I hear that right?
You did hear it right. I want to make it clear he's not questioning the principle of it, but the timing of it has been affected. And to be fair, it's affected by a couple of things, not just the images out of Gaza. You have Minister Smotrich who comes out and says, if the Saudis want a Palestinian state, well, they can just go ride their camels.
Right.
Well, you can imagine how that was taken in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
There are a few things that would be seen as more of a kind of lack of respect and indignity. This Israeli government, some of the things it's doing on the ground, especially because of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, with what can only be described as some pogroms right now in the West Bank, they would be constantly confronting the Saudis with issues that would embarrass them.
Just to be clear for our listeners, we're talking about Jewish Israeli extremists who have been attacking Palestinian citizens in what we would call Judea and Samaria, but the world calls the West Bank, also attacking villages, cars, like churches a while back. So this is a real problem. And the national security minister, Mr. Ben-Gvir, doesn't seem to be trying to stop it. In some ways, he seems to be trying to encourage it.
Correct. And recently, the prime minister came out and said, look, we're a state of laws and we will deal with this. But an awful lot has happened, and you've had over the last 6 weeks or so when Palestinians were trying to harvest the olives from the olive trees, which is a fundamental, there are few things that are more basic within Palestinian society than that. You even had Israelis going to help protect them, Israeli civilians, and they were being beaten up by these same thugs. And so, these images compound the problem. So the distinction I was drawing was it's not a question of principle. And I even suspect, I'd go farther, Joel, I believe that while you may not have formal political normalization in the near term, I would still think it's possible during the lifetime of the Trump presidency. It's just not possible immediately. And I also suspect that private Israelis outside of this Israeli government, I suspect that business can be done. So we may not see formal political normalization, but we may see some practical forms of cooperation without great visibility, but nonetheless what would be meaningful in terms of building a longer-term relationship.
All right, hold that thought for just 1 second. We've got to go to a commercial break. When we come back, more with former U.S. Ambassador Dennis Ross, a very senior and distinguished fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and a formal and informal advisor to 5 U.S. presidents. Don't go away. We'll be right back on Inside the Epicenter. Welcome back to Inside the Epicenter. It's been a fascinating week in which President Trump hosted Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, the crown prince and de facto ruler of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, at the White House, really rolled out the red carpet and signed a bunch of major deals, including upgrading the U.S.-Saudi security relationship to a major non-NATO ally. And of course, this question of, President Trump says he's going to sell F-35, the most advanced fighter jet in the world, to the Saudis. Israelis are a little concerned. They're not opposed, but they would. But that could change the balance of power in the region. Israel has a written agreement with the United States that Israel will always maintain the qualitative military edge, QME, against any friend or enemy or ally in the region. So will that change that? I don't know. But the Israelis are open. But what they want is, of course, for the for the President Trump to leverage that sale for the Saudis to say, we'll get the planes if we make peace, and the Saudis to say, great, let's make peace with Israel. I want to get back into that conversation of the likelihood or not of peace and normalization between Israel and the Saudis joining the Abraham Accords because we started talking about it with Dennis in the first portion, but I want to get into it more because it is a real insight, the dynamics that relate to that, whether that's going to happen or not. And if it is going to happen, why and when? And if it isn't going to happen, why and why not? It helps us understand what's going on inside the epicenter. But first, I just want to say welcome back to Inside the Epicenter. And I want to say we'd be very grateful for your financial help as we come into the year end. As we're approaching, Giving Tuesday, and we approach the end of the calendar year of 2025, the needs of the Joshua Fund to invest in the work that we're doing educationally, in terms of humanitarian relief, caring for the poor and needy, and for widows and orphans, and doing that through the local believers here in the epicenter, and of course, strengthening the church in Israel and in 5 neighboring Arab countries, and of course, among the Palestinians as well in Gaza and the West Bank. All that, the needs are higher on the backside of this war. Okay, the war seems to be over. We've gotten all of our hostages back. Things are a little quieter, though not completely quiet. But the wounding of Israelis and Palestinians and the devastation in the region and the doors that have opened spiritually, people, Muslims and Jews, more interested in talking about the Lord, talking about the Bible, and even talking about the gospel more than ever before. I've never seen the openness in this region as I see right now, as my team here at the Joshua Fund sees right now. And that means there's a lot of opportunity, and with opportunity, since we're a fund, we need additional funds, both to meet the current needs and to expand. If that's something that you would like to do, you feel moved by the Holy Spirit to help us, not just prayerfully, but also financially, we would be deeply grateful, especially if you become a monthly financial partner, what we call an Epicenter ally. And you can go to, and I would encourage you to go to joshuafund.com. Again, joshuafund.com. You'll see a big button at the top right-hand corner, big yellow button that says donate. When you click it, it doesn't mean that you have donated. It means you now have an opportunity to look at what your options are. The easiest option is for you to give securely online through a credit card, through PayPal, through Venmo, through Bitcoin. There's a lot of different ways to give. It's secure in our joshuafund.com system. And for Americans, it's tax deductible. And for Canadians, it's tax deductible. You have to scroll down to the bottom of the page to see the Canadian portion. If you're a Canadian listener or Canadian citizen, wherever you are, just scroll down to the bottom of the donate page and you'll see where to click and see how to give to get a Canadian tax deduction. I would encourage you to do that. If you can give $50 a month, $75 a month, $100 a month or more, it would enormously strengthen our not only our reserves and our cash position so we can keep investing aggressively as we have been, but it helps us know that you're with us for the long haul, or at least, maybe for the next year or two, however long you feel comfortable in donating to the Joshua Fund. If you can only do a one-time gift, we get it, and we really appreciate it. So we're not trying to discourage a one-time gift, but if you can give monthly, we would deeply appreciate it. Again, if you become an Epicenter ally, you'll see all the details, how to do it, super simple. Go to joshuafund.com, look at the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the donate button, and you can go from there. And we'll put a link to that donate page here in the show notes. So please check those out. I also want you to check out the show notes because you'll have a link to the full bio of Ambassador Dennis Ross, just drawing a little bit from it so you understand, this is one of the most experienced experts on Israel and the Middle East, the Arab Muslim world, the Iranian world in Washington. I deeply appreciate him. I don't always agree with Dennis Ross, but I think his insights are enormously helpful. He is a distinguished fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He teaches at the Georgetown University Center for Jewish Civilization. And for more than 12 years, Ambassador Ross played a leading role in shaping U.S. involvement here in the epicenter, particularly the peace process, dealing directly with the parties on multiple sides as the U.S. point man on the peace process, both in the administrations of U.S. President George H.W. Bush, Bush 41, and President Bill Clinton. He was instrumental in helping Israelis and Palestinians reach the 1995 interim peace agreement. He successfully brokered the 1997 Hebron Accord. He facilitated the 1994 Israel-Jordan peace treaty. He worked intensively to bring Israel and Syria together, although that didn't lead to a peace treaty. Later, he served for 2.5 years as a special assistant to President Obama on the National Security Council as the senior director for the Middle East and North African region. And he spent 6 months as a special advisor on Iran policy for then U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton. He's the author of multiple books. He was on the State Department's policy planning staff. And that's why I just want to give you a little bit more detail of who we're talking about here. Now, I find him a bipartisan voice. He's not a partisan. He's worked for the presidents and advisors on both sides, Democrat and Republican. And I think his perspective is important. And especially now, Dennis has spent a lot of time with the Saudis in recent years. The first person I went to when I was invited to go meet with Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, I went to Ambassador Dennis Ross in Washington. I said, Dennis, I need you to sort of read me in on how you see stuff. Now, he was not the only one I talked to, but he was certainly the first. And I was very grateful for his help. His insights were enormously helpful. So let's go back now to our conversation on how did this Trump MBS meeting go? What was accomplished? And where is Mohammed bin Salman heading? Where is he taking Saudi Arabia? And will he make a deal to join the Abraham Accords and bring a peace and normalization relationship between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Jewish state of Israel? Let's go back to my conversation with Ambassador Dennis Ross. Okay, welcome back, Ambassador Dennis Ross. Thank you so much. Let's pick up on this because the biggest question that evangelicals want to understand is, are we closer or further away, or is it not going to happen at all? The issue of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. There are other issues that are important too. We've talked about some of those, but this question, so let me frame it this way. And you sort of answered it in the first part, but I just want to frame it this way and have you respond to this type of question. The question is, are the Saudis at the highest levels, Mohammed bin Salman and his inner circle, are they souring on normalization with Israel, or are they do they want to get there, but they're navigating through the devastation in Gaza, which I've been in Gaza. I've seen it. It's apocalyptic destruction. It's not surprising the Arab world is focused, riveted on that horror. And you mentioned our very extremist, I believe, beyond the pale National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir. In other words, has NBS's strategic calculation shifted and he's soured on normalization, or specifically soured on normalization with Bibi Netanyahu and thinks, well, when another government comes, if it's Naftali Bennett, if it's somebody else, maybe we can make a deal with him? Or is it just a matter of time? What is MBS thinking right now? And what is he telling Trump?
Look, I think you're asking the question the right way. And I want to answer it with the following elements. Element number one, as a principle, he accepts it because he looks at Israel as a country that sees the same threats that Saudi Arabia sees, a common threat perception. He sees an Israel that is the startup nation that has so much of what he wants Saudi Arabia to become. He sees an Israel that understands in the region you want to create a coalition of those who believe in progress, prosperity, development, modernization as an answer to those whose ideology would turn the clock back, would keep the region mired in constant wars, conflict, instability for the sake of those in power, because the conflict serves their interests and preserves them in power. Israel has that view the same as Saudi Arabia has that view. So strategically, he understands the nature of the convergence and the common set of interests. But there's an environment now that has been complicated precisely because of the imagery that has come out of Gaza, which, as you've described it, it looks like an apocalyptic scene. And from an Arab standpoint, the fact that Hamas ultimately is the one that's responsible for this, still there's been terrible suffering of Palestinians in Gaza, and the Israelis were the ones who were carrying it out. And so that creates a certain climate. But there's also, when you shaped it as part of your question, there is a feeling that somehow this Israeli government and this Israeli prime minister focus exclusively on their needs and don't take into account the needs of, say, Saudi Arabia or others. And so when you ask the question, if there's a change in Israel, would it help to change the environment? I think from the Saudi perspective, and I'm explaining this from their perspective because I talk to them a lot, I think the answer to that is yes. There is a concern that the current government, not only will they do things that will embarrass them, that put them on the defensive, but they have no real confidence that would stop with this government. They don't see anything changing. So, look, they know they don't have a vote in what goes on in Israel, but Israel's behavior does affect them. And so the question of principle is not the issue. The question of timing is the issue.
Okay, so let's, like we're at the eye doctor, click, click, click. Is that clear or less clear? Is that sharper or less clear? Is it Netanyahu or is it Netanyahu's coalition? Now, I know Bibi Netanyahu. I've known him for 25 years. You've known him better than me. He's a strong cup of tea. I get that. But the Saudis don't seem to mind strong, decisive leaders. However, so what I'm trying to get at from your perspective, Dennis, is
it's this government. I got it, Joe. It is this government, this coalition. Because what they've seen is they don't believe Netanyahu has done anything to prevent Ben-Gvir and Smotrich from doing what they're doing. And so it's this coalition. So long as this coalition is there, they are convinced it would act in ways that will, let's say they cross the threshold and they do this, and then, a week later, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich do something that they can't explain and that put them on the defensive. They do not want to be in that position. When they take this lead,
I'm as Israeli, I'm saying that, because I think the question is, they were close to making a deal with Bibi before, and now the question to me is, Bibi's ultra-religious and ultra-nationalist parties have, over the last few months, either quit on him or indicated they would quit soon, or a combo platter. But Bibi doesn't seem to have, because of his own lack of trust that Benny Gantz has, or Bennett has, or Yair Lapid, or the other major leaders. He doesn't really seem to have an obvious center-right coalition to build, and so. But if he did, let's say 26, we go to elections, and it's a complicated, election result, which I think it will be. I don't think it will be decisive for Bibi if they do well at all. That's an open question. But if he were to try to cobble a different group together, does that change the equation, or it would take a while for the Saudis to watch that sort of settle and hold, knowing the political troubles in coalition building here in Israel?
Yeah, I think the answer is they would probably wait to see, okay, what is this government? And they would want to know, all right, can they work out a formula with this new government, whether it has Bibi as prime minister or not? Can they work out a formula on the issue of coexistence with the Palestinians, which they can then point to?
Okay.
So to be fair, there's a substantive angle to this as well. They want to understand that there's an Israeli government that is also committed to coexistence with the Palestinians. It wants to know that, even at a time when they say there has to be reform on the Palestinian Authority side, and there have to be changes there, and they clearly, one of the interesting things about the Saudi position, by the way, on Gaza, is that their attitude on the disarming of Hamas is actually the same as the Israeli position. They don't believe you can have reconstruction in Gaza unless you've had demilitarization in Gaza.
Amen. Yeah. I think the Emiratis are the same way. Well, but all right, so the question then becomes this, I think. How much should we put weight on the phrase that MBS used in the Oval Office when the issue of normalization came up? He said he needs a clear path to a two-state solution. Now, that is similar formulation of pre-October 7th. It's not, I need a state. And my own perception from talking to people prior to October 7th was he doesn't really care as much about a Palestinian state as he does about restructuring Saudi alliances in the region. However, as we would say in Hebrew, aval. However,
aval.
We're in a different world now. Yeah, we're in a different world now. And Bennett doesn't want a Palestinian state. No, almost no Israeli wants a Palestinian state. Do the Saudis realize how much the goal line has shifted after October 7th? His own MBS's own objectives notwithstanding, this is not the same world as pre-October 7th.
I think that it's interesting. I think it's a very important question, and I would answer it this way. Is he mindful of how things have changed within Israel since October 7th? I think, by the way, he is. I also think that he cares more about the Palestinian issue now than he did before, because he also sees how it can disrupt what his priorities are. Right. His priority is he wants calm in the region so that Saudi Arabia can be transformed on the vision of 2030. He came in understanding that the kingdom, to have a future, had to fundamentally change and diversify its economy. And that required fundamental changes socially. You couldn't exclude half your population. It helps to explain, his reforms as it relates to women, because he understood you couldn't achieve this transformation without these kinds of changes. So the issue is, I think, matters more to him now because of its effect on what his priorities are. I think he is someone who is more committed to the idea that ultimately you won't have what you need in the region between Israelis and Palestinians if there isn't a Palestinian state. But I don't think when he says a credible pathway, it's not an instantaneous one. I think he understands, look, in a sense, you're going to have a pathway that proves itself. I'll tell you what I've said to the Saudis repeatedly since October 7th. I've said, there are Israelis today across the board, left to right, with a small percentage maybe on the fringe, believe that a Palestinian state would be led by Hamas or Hamas-like groups. So that's unthinkable. So if you're going to change the body politic in Israel, they have to see things that demonstrate, well, that's not the Palestinian state that would emerge. And that is a combination of many things that have to happen. Some are rhetorical. We've never had the Palestinians acknowledge the historic Jewish connection to the land, meaning acknowledge the legitimacy of Israel as a Jewish state. Right. Recognizing Israel as a fact is not the same as accepting the legitimacy of it. That has to take place. A Palestinian entity cannot have independent militias. A Palestinian entity cannot have an alliance or invite the Iranians or rejectionists in. A Palestinian entity has to demonstrate that it won't be a failed state. If you had a Palestinian state today, it'd be a failed state. Failed states, by definition, create unbelievable political space for rejectionists. Right. So these are the things I've said to the Saudis over the last several years, and I think they understand that. And so my answer to you, it's a complicated answer, is that I think there is more, including with MBS, I think there's more of a belief that you probably need to have a Palestinian state at some point. But the path to get there is one that requires steps by Palestinians, not just Israelis, but by Palestinians too, to prove. I've often said the following, Joel, now this is me speaking, not them, that the Palestinians are a people. And as a people, they should have a right to self-determination. But that right comes with responsibilities, and it can't be fulfilled until they've demonstrated those responsibilities. The weakness of the Palestinian national movement is it's never had a leadership that was prepared to assume responsibilities and accept accountability. Yeah. And until it does, the idea of statehood, as an aspiration may be understandable, but Palestinians need to act the way, for example, Salam Fayyad was acting. His attitude was, when he was prime minister, we need to act like the Zionists did. The Zionists built a state from the ground up to prove that they could do it and they were worthy of it. We have to do the same. Now, they've not had a leadership that adopted that position. They've had a leadership that focused on slogans, not on substance. They've had a leadership that looked for symbols, not substance.
Yeah, yeah. And on radicalization in the mosques, in the media.
Absolutely. And in education, the socialization. The readiness to change the socialization is also a sign that, okay, now we understand. To have a state, this is the way we earn a state.
All right, let me ask you one last question. Ambassador Dennis Ross, very grateful for your time, very grateful for your insights. I want to ask you one last question, by way of comparison and contrast. The United Arab Emirates under President Mohammed bin Zayed, MBZ, it's pretty remarkable to me, but impressive, encouraging that the Abraham Accords have held. I mean, Sudan's a whole basket case unto itself. Let's not even talk about Sudan. Yeah. But the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco have held. But I would say most impressively in those three is MBZ and the UAE, because they kept flying to Israel during this war. Lynn and I, my wife and I, took flights. We wouldn't have been able to get out because there was no other international carriers flying. El Al was full and the prices were exorbitant. UAE planes were literally flying business people, diplomats, but also Israelis in and out through Dubai every single day. I think 7 flights a day. That's pretty amazing to hold in the midst of 2 years of war. I guess I got a 2-part quick question. One, why is that holding with MBZ? And then, is that a model that somehow MBS can embrace while, he doesn't want to, he thinks, I think of MBZ as sort of and UAE as sort of a little brother compared to the Saudis, but that he can expand upon and build upon going forward?
Look, I think it is a model. I think the reason for it is the UAE really believed this was a strategic decision they made. And they believed it was the right strategic decision, and they were not prepared to go back on it. Now, have they been put on the defensive at times, and have they been upset at times over Israeli actions?
Yeah,
the answer is yes.
Talk to them.
Absolutely, and they were very clear, I think, with President Trump on the issue of annexation, which is one of the reasons that he said there'll be no annexation. And their argument, by the way, which I find quite compelling, they got something for Palestinians because when they normalized, they said, you can normalize with us or you can annex, but you can't have both. And right. They say rightfully, we delivered something for the Palestinians. We didn't just talk about something for the Palestinians. We delivered something for the Palestinians. So they commit to it. I've had the same experience as you. I actually was meeting at one point with a foreign minister, and he asked me where I was going next. I said, well, I'm going to Israel from here. And he said, well, that's not a surprise because we're the only one who's flying. Right. So they're committed to this. They, too, would like to see a different Israeli government. There's no question. And I think, some of what they are prepared to do, you'll see an expansion even of their relationship when they're also put in a different position. But they did not walk away. They never recalled their ambassador. They were never going to turn the clock back. This is what they believe in. So I do think, again, it's something to cross the threshold. You and I both get that. It takes a lot to get to the point where you cross the threshold. Once you cross it, I think the model that we see with the UAE will be a similar one in Saudi Arabia.
I'm pretty sure I agree with you. I guess time will tell, but I believe that MBS really does want this. That's your analysis. It's mine. Yes. And I guess the question is, can we help create the conditions to have it be seen by MBS as in Saudi national interest? It's not just his own decision, even though you can call him an absolute dictator or at least an absolute monarch. Effectively, I mean, he's effectively running the kingdom, but he is influenced by the street, and the street is like, you got to be crazy, like. we can't go from the perception of Israel carpet bombing Gaza to, hey, we're one big happy family. Let's do technology deals together.
That's right.
So the question is, where do we go from here? How do we navigate forward? Will the Saudis get involved in the reconstruction of Gaza and the demilitarization and the de-radicalization? I think they could be huge allies there for Trump, but effectively it helps Israel. And but time will tell. And I'm cautiously optimistic. I would almost say bullish, but I know I've lived here and watched this place too long to be fully bullish. But I feel like the forces of the good guys are right now outfoxing the bad guys, but there's a lot of landmines ahead of us. So
that's a really good way. Look, it's a very good, Joel. It's a very good way to describe it. I go back to what I said about there's a moment. The one thing I know, again, I write about in the book, is when you need to capitalize on moments. The problem is when you miss moments, you're usually worse off than if you hadn't had the moment at all. So there's a lot riding on being able to take advantage of what's been created by what the Israelis did militarily. The need for a political strategy to match what was done militarily is still there. And I think in the end, the Saudis will be a partner for that, because where they want to go, what they want the region to look like. I think the Security Council resolution is a good first step. You still need mechanisms to take what's called for in the Trump plan and now in the Security Council resolution, to take what's been called for and actually see it happen on the ground.
Yeah. Ambassador Dennis Ross, so grateful for your time. Happy Thanksgiving, and let's pray for a much better and more encouraging 2026.
I'm completely with you. Happy Thanksgiving, and I join you in those prayers.
Thank you. I look forward to reading your book, Statecraft 2.0, and having you back on the podcast to discuss it.
Thanks a lot, Joel. I look forward to the next time as well.
Bless you. Well, I really appreciate Ambassador Dennis Ross spending time with us, taking us inside the epicenter as he sees it. And what Lynn and I are trying to do on this program is give you a range of different voices, perspectives, whether they're believers, Jewish or Arab or other, whether they're not believers, maybe they're Middle East experts, maybe they're Israelis, maybe they're Americans, maybe they're Arabs. We're trying to give you a wide range of perspectives. And it doesn't mean we agree with every single thing they say. I don't want you to think that, but I do want you to think these are people we value. Lynn and I want to hear their perspective, and we want to bring you into the room, as it were, to hear their perspective as well. They're people that you are unlikely to get to spend time with on your own. And we think that's what makes Inside the Epicenter as a podcast valuable. Thank you so much for listening. Look, we would very much like, as we approach this end of the calendar year, if you could become a financial supporter or expand your the amount of financial support you provide the Joshua Fund. The opportunities, as I said earlier, the opportunities for ministry in Israel, among the Palestinians, and in the 5 neighboring Arab countries that we work in, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt, they are expanding. The needs we're already investing in are large and expensive, but the opportunities that we're seeing right now for new opportunities, new initiatives that we could fund are growing. And with that, we need to know that we have additional sources of income, whether from individuals or from foundations or from churches, congregations, from church missions budgets, so forth. And as we approach the end of the year, we would very much love it if you would make a donation. If you are not yet a monthly donor, an Epicenter ally, we call them, please go to joshuafund.com, click the yellow donate button at the top right, and it'll show you exactly how to give. And we would encourage you, if you can, give a donation of $50 a month or $75 a month or $100 a month or more. It'd be enormously helpful. If you can't do that right now and you can make a one-time donation, we would be super grateful for that as well. But when you become an Epicenter ally, giving it $50 a month or more, and you commit to that, this is helpful because we understand that you're with us for the longer haul. And it just helps us budget and to know that we've got a growing group of not just prayer warriors, but financial partners that allow us to do the work that God has given us to do, including educating Christians in the United States and Canada and Israel and all over the world through educational initiatives like Inside the Epicenter. I mean, it's pretty amazing to us that this podcast, which was started a number of years ago, has surged in interest. And before the war, yeah, it was a wonderful podcast, super educational, super helpful. But during the war, after October 7th, we surged into the top 1.5% of all podcasts in the world. And as we headed into 2025, we are now in the top 1%. So continuing to move up. Now, does that matter? It's a signal. It's a signal that helps us understand how much and how many people, Christians and others, around the world are hungry for longer form conversations about what's really happening in Israel and the Arab, Iranian, Muslim world. And they want it from a biblical worldview. And that's what Lynn and I bring to this. We have, as I say, a range of different guests. Some of them are followers of Jesus. Some of them are not. But their perspectives are interesting, helpful. And, the Epicenter is a complicated place. And we love to sort of bring you into the room and see and hear a wide range of perspectives. So Lynn and I are very grateful that you are giving, that you are listening. And we just encourage you as we approach Giving Tuesday and beyond, towards the end of the year, as we get towards Christmas and year-end giving, we would really love it if you could make a significant year-end gift and or become, ideally, a monthly supporter of the Joshua Fund. And you, again, can go to joshuafund.com and hit the donate button, and it'll walk you through how to do it in a secure way, as well as a tax-deductible way if you're American or Canadian. Thank you so much for listening. We're so grateful. The Joshua Fund is a ministry to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus, according to the Abrahamic covenant, according to Genesis 12, 1-3. And we believe literally in that promise that God made to Abraham and later to Isaac, later to Jacob, and to the nation of Israel, when God said, I will bless those who bless you. Those who curse you, though, I will curse. And we want to be blessed. We want to see the blessings of God in our life, and we want those blessings for you as well. I'll close with this scripture, which is encouraging to us, from Romans chapter 15, beginning in verse 25. The Apostle Paul writes, I'm going to Jerusalem, serving the saints. For Macedonia and Achaia, the congregations there, the believers there, have been pleased to make a contribution for the poor among the saints in Jerusalem. Yes, they were pleased to do so. And they are indebted, these Gentile believers are indebted to the Jewish believers and to the nation of the Jewish people. Why? The Apostle Paul writes, for if the Gentiles have shared in their spiritual things, they are indebted to minister to them also in material things. Meaning God has blessed Israel and the Jewish people and made Israel and the Jewish people a blessing to bring the scriptures, to bring the apostles and the prophets. Jesus came from the Jewish people and came here to the Jewish people. And the gospel went forth from Jerusalem to Judea, to Samaria, and to the very ends of the earth, where you probably are listening right now. And because of that blessing, where God used the Jewish people to bring the Messiah, bring the gospel, bring the word of God to the rest of the world, we do have not just a spiritual indebtedness, but a material one as well. And yes, we should give to lots of different ministries, but there's something about blessing Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus that is especially encouraged in the New Testament, particularly through the Apostle Paul and particularly from Romans 15. So this is Joel Rosenberg. Thank you so much again for listening to this edition of Inside the Epicenter. On behalf of Lynn and our entire team, our staff, our board, the producers that do such a great job making this episode, one episode after another, thank you for listening, and we look forward to you joining us on the next episode of Inside the Epicenter. I'm Joel Rosenberg. On your left, you'll find some videos we've chosen specifically for you. We look forward to partnering with you to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus.